Case number 5, one child too many. China's one-child policy, enacted in 1979 to address China's social, economic, and environmental problems due to overpopulation, limits a couple to having only one child because there is not enough space, natural resources, and jobs to accommodate the booming population. However, some consequences of enforcing this law include forced abortions, female infanticide, higher female suicide rates, and gender imbalance. Furthermore, some feel that the policy is unfair because the rich can afford to pay the fine for violating the policy. In contrast, the United States does not have such a policy, and its citizens enjoy the liberty of having as many children as they like. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar star in TLC's reality TV show, 19 Kids and Counting. With income from real estate investments and their TV show, and by living frugally, the Duggar family is able to support themselves without government assistance. Similarly, Nada Suleman, the famous Octomom, who is currently under investigation for welfare fraud, used reproductive technologies to have tuplets in addition to her 6 other children. Your question is, under what conditions, if any, should a government be allowed to limit the number of children parents can have or to interfere with their reproductive liberty? Farragut. My bad, guys. Okay. Farragut, you will have 2 minutes for deliberation, starting now. One minute remaining. Okay, time is up. You will now have 5 minutes to present. Go.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, judges, and we appreciate the ethical dilemma that we hope to discuss articulately today. Okay, so we wanted to begin by kind of just identifying the broad setting this issue kind of takes place, identifying some dimensions that are relevant to this discussion, and then kind of focus what our response is in particular. First of all, the question was again that should the government be allowed to limit the number of children that citizens can have? So one of the most clear arguments against that notion is that in a way it's a devaluation of human life. It's also a devaluation of, it sort of construes people as reproductive units in a way, which really deontologically is sort of offensive. It's kind of reducing people to something that's less than desirable. However, in a case that would sort of suggest that a government should be allowed to do that is that there is a certain carrying capacity in a biological system that needs to be maintained, and in the end, choosing more of a utilitarian perspective might promote the most good.
And as our council has already stated, we recognize that it might be necessary to violate what some consider the fundamental, human right to procreate in this case. but looking at having underpinnings or a framework of utilitarianism, we see that it might be necessary to bend the rules in this case in order to satisfy the greatest pleasure, the greatest happiness in this case. So going off of kind of those underpinnings, it's perhaps if we look at carrying capacity or the problems associated with overpopulation, it's if we allow to continue the fundamental human right of procreation, is it even worth it? We have to ask ourselves that question: is it worth it if people are starving, if there's no access to clean drinking water, if people are having to wear masks just to protect themselves from the pollution that's come as a result of this?
When it comes to government regulating reproduction, the government of a nation has a fundamental responsibility to protect the freedoms that are guaranteed by that nation. And the freedoms guaranteed by that nation are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, obviously. And it's very hard to pursue happiness if people are constantly starving due to overpopulation. But they also guarantee the right to a public education, which is harder to provide if families are having so many children that the public schools are just completely overcrowded, forcing people out of the public schools and making it much harder to share what is considered the commonwealth that all people are supposed to share. And so we believe that a government does have the right and the responsibility to limit reproduction if the rate of reproduction is causing significant and quantifiable harm to the society as a whole.
So although we weighing our options to find what option gives us the greatest amount of happiness, we recognize that having the right to procreate does give people pleasure in this case. But the option that gives the most pleasure would be to not have to deal with problems associated with overpopulation or carrying capacity in this case.
And it is also relevant to include, like you said, we're engaging in some form of hedonistic calculus and saying that, long term, we're going to predict that if we allow people to continue to procreate, that, they will overpopulate the earth. But based on the evidence that's presented to us, that seems like a reasonable assumption.
Fulton, your 1-minute deliberation starts now. Fulton, your 1-minute deliberation is up. You will now have 5 minutes to respond.
Thank you. And thank you for the very interesting points from Garrison.
You make very valid points, but we politely disagree. And our reasons for that is because in an economy where you can only have one child, there are such effects stated in the case such as forced abortions, female infanticides, and higher suicide rates in women. That's risking women's lives. And what I mean by that is, if a woman's not happy, if she wants to have more children, she should very well be able to. And it causes problems with the woman, it causes depression, it causes all types of issues that cause her to just be very unhappy in the economy they're living in.
And by taking away someone's right to control their own body, you're violating their basic human rights. And that under no circumstances should be allowed, because that could lead to very dangerous things.
When you adopt a social standpoint to where someone's life is disvalued and you control their body, it's a very slippery slope as to where it becomes a dictatorial position where they control your everyday facets of life. If you can't even choose to have kids if you want to, then that's going towards the wrong direction in controlling the people's lives.
Something else mentioned in the case is there's an unbalanced ratio currently of 100 boys for every 118 girls. And it's estimated that in a few years, that number is going to be much, much higher because families want males to carry on the name and the genes. And it means in 2020,
it's predicted in 2020 there will be approximately 24 million men in China unable to wed because of the lack of women.
Women should be able to have as many kids as they would like. Like my other teammate said, they should at least have, enjoy their kids' lives, and it could cause depression, and that they should enjoy their lives with as many kids as they would like.
Also, for the effects of when a woman cannot have their own children, it does have an impact as to social objectification, as they stated, of women, and that can lead to a very, very bad place in social policy as to where it's okay that there is this huge deficit in men to women, when that is not okay, and that can lead to a large drop-off in reproduction.
And there was a really strong quote mentioned in the article by a journalist, Ma Jiang, that by taking away a woman's right to reproduce as she chooses, you turn women into objects, resources, or means of production.
thank you.
Farragut, you will now have 1 minute for deliberation.
Thank you, and thank you for your responses. We hope to provide some insightful counter responses. First of all, I think it's important that we refocus to the original question, which was, should governments be allowed to limit the number of children? So while this inherently is going to involve individual rights, the question is more of what's ethically correct for a government to do in the interest of its people. And so I think that sort of, I think we've lost a little bit of the focus of the argument or the discussion. So that being said, we are, in some of your points were that we are, kind of shortchanging individuals' rights, and in a way we are, and we've acknowledged that. We feel that we wanted to use a utilitarian perspective on this, which is going to entail sacrificing individual rights for the overall good of an entire government, nation, fill in the blank. So that's some of the problems that you mentioned that's kind of inherent with pursuing a utilitarian perspective. However, we felt that was most appropriate given the evidence we have about this topic.
Also, I'd like to address these effects of the population limit, like depression, higher suicide rates because of this force of only a certain amount of children. But this would probably only increase with such a large population that would be unhappy overall. So taking utilitarianism standpoint, that would also create a general consensus of a more satisfied country.
Additionally, like, we just like to note that, like, we do recognize that in no situation is it great to try and take away these fundamental rights that we've talked about, whether it be procreation in this case. But in this case, you know, we feel it necessary to have to take that right away if it's in the best interest of a people as a whole. A government's duty in most cases is always to try and attempt to better society and better their people. And in this case, if we don't try and recede and take back some of the rights of individuals, we lose track of exactly what the greater good is. You know, is it worth, the question and the stance we're taking is it might be worth taking away some of these rights in order to prevent a future where human life isn't even worth living at all.
Also, the 118 men for every 100 women, that might be a cultural aspect instead of a result of this.
The desirability of the gender is more of a cultural dilemma than an ethical dilemma, we feel.
Your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you. Judges, you can start asking questions.
My question is, you had mentioned other rights, like the right to a public education, and you've decided to take a utilitarian approach. And why not think that this issue could be approached as a balance of rights? Because you had mentioned these other rights, for instance, of education. Why not think that you could still hold to the standard of individual rights and show how this is the best, that we have to balance these rights against each other, and that overall this will be this solution would best preserve individual rights? Why take the utilitarian approach instead of trying to take an approach that still appeals to the fundamental, that does that, but still come to your same conclusion?
I guess the first thought that comes to mind. So I guess to clarify, you're kind of saying, as a government, why wouldn't it be ethically permissible to just sort of, share with the populace, hey, this is a possible scenario. If we continue to populate this rate, we really encourage you to reduce, child production, but we're not enforcing that. Am I correctly interpreting that?
Yeah, I'm saying you could construct an argument in which, look, we think we need to come to this solution to preserve and protect rights. Like, if we don't do something now, we're going to be risking our ability to preserve rights in the future. So the ultimate appeal can still be to rights.
Right.
So why, I guess, explain more why you've chosen to insist on this utilitarian perspective to get to your conclusion.
Well, I think absolutely the sort of argument you're mentioning is not necessarily completely contradictory to what we said. In a lot of ways, I think it's similar. I'd say as a group, the reason we felt utilitarianism was the most appropriate is that I think in this case with the government being able to enforce a rule, it gives a more definite, you have a more definite result. With the plan that you're kind of talking about, it sort of relies on a large number of individuals to take to heart the information at present, which we felt, given the current statistics that are available to everyone in the world, and they know that the problems of overpopulation, it's not likely that a whole society would actively choose to do the more, I guess, rational option in this case, which is to limit their procreation. So we felt, a government needs to be able to step in and mandate that so that the result is definite. And because, in dealing with the utilitarianism, we want to be able to predict our end result as well as possible.
My question is sort of related in some ways because it seems like if you're going to depend on a consequentialist argument where government can limit your right to procreate in the case of sustainability issues where we're going to have overpopulation and we're all going to be worse off, then it seems like the government would then have rights to limit reproduction for all sorts of other reasons because of good consequences that might stem. So we could not allow people to reproduce that are likely to maybe have some sort of genetic disorder, or we might limit reproduction because the parents are addicted to drugs or do drugs regularly, and so we'd be better off not having children in situations like these. There might be statistics that show they grow out to be worse off. So if you're going to take the consequentialist line, then it seems like we're going to need to limit reproduction for all sorts of reasons, not just population or sustainability sorts of reasons.
I think the fundamental difference is, in our case, we're not so much trying to promote good consequences as avoid bad consequences in this case. You bring, great points such as like a eugenics kind of thing, where those who have genetic disorders might be trying like root it out in this case. But that's not the end result we're looking for. We're looking forward to, in this case, we have an action, in this case, overpopulation, or where the carrying capacity might be, reached and then surpassed. And we're trying to avoid the consequences that are directly related with that one problem. In this case, the consequences we've noted would be perhaps a decrease in the food supplies in this case, or clean drinking water, or educational capability for the youth. In this case, we've kind of tried to say that grouping all of those together, those cons kind of add together to make a place where that all of these different things help to define what human life is as a whole. And if that level of human life and what we're used to isn't attained, that's the biggest con that we're trying to avoid in this case. So I guess to say, not trying to promote our agenda through this, but trying to stop any bad actions that could result from the action that we've already made.
Well, let's do clarification. Actually, two clarification-related questions. So your broad view seems to be something like the government is justified, at least in cases of emergency, which we may find in the case of overpopulation, restricting reproductive liberties. The two clarification-related questions would be that's a very, for the purposes of answering the question, that seems suitable. But now let's try to put some teeth on that. What would be the actual number of children that people could be allowed to have now? So would it be something like China's one-child policy? Would it be a two-child policy? Would it be three? Or would it be like some kind of weird? Would it be more case by case? Would it be like, well, you get two, but if you're really rich, you get three, right? Well, so I'd like to know kind of what you think a policy would, like, given the current state of things, what the policy would be okay, and then of course the follow-up question is China's one-child policy too restrictive, given whatever your ideal policy is?
Yeah, we do understand that it's difficult to try and put a plan or some way to actually identify a great policy associated with the stance that we've taken in this case. If it were a perfect world, it would be great to try and do a case-by-case analysis, but that hardly seems feasible considering the mass amount of people who live today. If we're looking at perhaps just like a nation-by-nation analysis, if you look at China, I think that the main thing is you have to put it in context of the world population, of course, but looking at food resources and the specific scenario that a nation has, specific circumstances that they've been placed in, those are the more important, criteria of analysis that you would have to use to determine such a policy. Now,
I also, there's, this is getting, I guess, very specific, but logistically there exist algorithms which can calculate the carrying capacity of any, ecosystem essentially, which it sounds kind of, like we're reducing human life, and we kind of are in a way to say that we're going to calculate exactly what, But at least for, like you're saying, food resources, the ability of the government to sustain people, I think you can, in a certain region, determine what's a good, what's a decent population size, and how can we divide that up so that people are able to procreate while still maintaining a quality of life. And I also, you mentioned the thing about China's one-child policy. Given the astronomical number of people in China, as a specific policy, in terms of our case, it's sort of similar, but I think there's also, either officially or unofficially, a certain aspect of China's one-child policy that's unfortunate, which we wouldn't agree with, is that there's a huge favoritism towards one gender, and it also encourages pretty blatantly the essentially execution or abortion of people who do not match the desired gender, which is not something that we would really extend to and say. However, the actual numerical limitation is not necessarily a bad idea.
There's only 1 minute left. That's question.
I got a little outlandish question, just to kind of push the how wedded you are to the utilitarianism again. Let's say that we could establish that that if we had people compete for breeding rights, okay, that we could somehow show that that was going to be it would solve all these problems, and we could show that it would maximize welfare of the entire community or the entire species or whatever. Other animals, ibexes, bighorn sheep. I mean, they fight for the right to breed, basically. If I could show that that would maximize the consequences for society, would you accept that?
I think, and this is true not just with this case, but with any utilitarian argument, it is essential to know that there is a line and that there is some kind of discretion attached to utilitarianism. By its nature, it is a practice which emphasizes the use of prediction and the use of balancing both positive and negative aspects. The system you're mentioning, I think, overwhelmingly would be negative because it is inherently a reduction. What we're suggesting isn't in a way a reduction. That reduction of human beings to literal, battling units that's so far, I think, beyond what we would agree with. And I understand the parallel because, in a way, they're very similar. But I do think with utilitarianism, all of the arguments come with an addendum that says, but use with caution, because it's not going to carry through. It's not going to carry through if you're going to, just keep extrapolating that. And I think it's true with any utilitarian argument.